What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome back to Basic Tactics. This is the Warhammer 40k video series where we pick one piece of Warhammer 40k and break it down for you so you can get better at using it to your advantage and increasing your win rate in those games of Warhammer 40k. As terrifying as the firepower of ranged weapons in Warhammer 40k can be, in games on the tabletop, a lot of times where games are decided is actually in melee combat in the fight phase. So today, we're going to be covering some of the ways that you can maximize your efficiency and use of the fight phase, especially combat movement mechanics, to improve that win rate and score higher in your games of 40k. Let's do it. Now, before we get into the video proper, I do have a short word from a sponsor. Have you ever wanted to get your strategic gaming off the tabletop and into a good old-fashioned RTS? But StarCraft is no longer supported, Warcraft Reforged was a travesty, and the last Dawn of War installment was not that good? Well, worry no longer, because your real-time strategy prayers have been answered. Purple War is a fast-paced RTS game that pays homage to the classic games that perfected the genre, like Warcraft 3, StarCraft Brood War, and Command & Conquer. It's intuitive, easy to learn, featuring a lot of familiar mechanics, and a high fantasy style that feels right at home. You've even got classically archetypical factions to play, like humans. Oh hey, that's like me, I'm one of those. Orcs. And elves. Also, here's some clips from the game. These guys are gathering resources to build their base, you know, all the RTS stuff. You can also spend those resources on these little armies that friggin' go out and absolutely destroy each other, which is fun to watch. Purple War has multiplayer support for up to 4v4 games, so you can coordinate with your teammates to formulate even more complex strategies. A free playtest is available from July 25th through August 7th, and the Purple War team is preparing a special event as an appreciation for all playtest participants. Find Purple War on social media for more information, and check out the links down below the video in the description and pinned comment to check out the game on Steam. Anyway, let's get back to it.
The first rule of Fight Club is...
you can only attack enemies that are 1 inch away from you.
The second rule of Fight Club is...
you can also attack enemies that are ½ inch from a friendly model that is ½ inch away from you. It's really simple and straightforward.
Now, first off, we'll cover some basic mechanics about how the fight phase in Warhammer 40,000 operates. Attacks in the fight phase are resolved exactly like those in the shooting phase, and we've already covered a lot about attack math and the most efficient way to assign and sequence those attacks. I'll throw links up to those videos in the description and up here now, so you can check those episodes out. We're not really going to be covering exactly how melee attacks work in this video because we've already talked about them in those previous episodes. The only difference between shooting and melee combat is that you can only make your melee attacks if you are within engagement range of an enemy unit, that is, if each model in your unit that is being selected to fight is in engagement range or is within ½ an inch of a friendly model in their unit that is within ½ an inch of an enemy model. That's usually called combat chaining. Mostly what we're going to be talking about today falls under the umbrella of what I like to call combat movement. And as a reminder, if you find these videos useful, you can go ahead and drop a like on the video, drop a subscribe on the channel so you get notified when new videos in the Basic Tactics series come up, and just get more sweet 40k content. Now, while each of these combat moves sound slightly different, they all actually work in identically the same way. Each of them allow each model in the unit to move 3 inches, as long as they don't start that move in base contact with an enemy model, and that 3 inches ends closer to the enemy model that was closest to them at the start of the move. Now, there's a ton of nuance in this rule that gets lost on many players, and a lot of that is what we're going to be talking about in this video. First up in terms of nuance is the fact that this movement is tracked on a per model basis, not a per unit basis. So each of your models making a combat move checks which model is the closest to them independently. Next up, it's important to keep in mind that while the move must end closer to the nearest enemy model, it doesn't necessarily have to move directly towards them. So if we were moving directly towards, for example, we would just be shoving this guy as close as we could towards that model, but instead, all we need to do, in this case, this Ravager is 1.6 inches away from the Tactical Marine, meaning that essentially we would need to end our combat movement 1.5 inches away. Although it doesn't look like we're moving towards the Tactical Marine, a move like this is actually going to be legal, since it's going to end closer than 1.6 from its starting position of the model that we're moving towards. And lastly, the part that can often be the most difficult to wrap your brain around is the fact that while this move only has to end closer to the nearest enemy, so if you're you're already stuck in engagement range with that enemy, it's typically difficult to leave engagement range. You can potentially leave the engagement range of other models that are not the closest when the combat movement began. So for example, our Ravener here is an inch away from this Assault Marine inside its engagement range, but is closer to the Tactical Marine, meaning that the Ravener has to end its combat movement closer than 0.4 inches to the Marine. That means that while it's engaged by the Assault Marine, this Ravener can actually move this way because it is moving towards the Tactical Marine that it started closest towards. That's a totally legal combat move and leaves it out of engagement range of the Assault Marine. So what are some of the ways that we can use combat movement like this to our advantage during a game? The easiest and most obvious is simply to get more models to fight the target unit. By, when the unit is selected to fight, moving more models to within an inch of enemies or half an inch of a friendly model that is within half an inch of an enemy in order to allow them to make their attacks targeting that enemy unit. But there are plenty of other ways to take advantage of it. The easiest thing that we can use these combat movements for is just to gain additional inches of movement. In this instance, it's important to remember that units that charged during a turn can combat activate regardless of whether or not they're actually in melee at the time. You're always eligible to fight even if you're not engaging any enemy units if you declare a charge that turn. So for example, we can have two units like this Tactical Squad and this Assault Marine Squad from the Space Marine player charge a single enemy unit. If the first unit to activate in that charge sequence kills the enemy squad, the second squad will still get to activate and move closer towards the nearest enemy. This can allow them up to 6 inches of additional movement as long as they complete that movement closer to the nearest enemy model on the table than they began. In situations like these, it means you can use the combat movement from the second unit to reposition yourself into particular areas of the table, for example, onto objectives, into cover, or into table quarters, or in order to score secondaries. Just keep in mind that they always have to be moving towards the closest enemy. In a similar situation, you can use this movement to get additional models onto an objective. Since a swirling melee on a central objective can often be decided by the player able to get the most models into these important areas on the table. Using pile-in and consolidate moves to get additional models to loop around and fight to grab the objective can allow you to outnumber opposing models on the objectives, tag them with your own objective secured models, and contest them to deny your opponent's points when it comes to the start of their turn, or even control them to give yourself 12-point primary VP turns. This is extremely important to keep in mind, and definitely the sign of a good player when they're able to use combat movement to steal objectives away from their opponent. Now lastly, there is a classic 40k tactic that falls into this category, and that is tri-pointing. Because models cannot move over other models unless the model making the move flies, surrounding a model with your own combat movement leaves it unable to successfully fall back on its subsequent turn, meaning that the unit is stuck in combat, making the unit that is surrounding it essentially immune to ranged attacks, and set up to kill the defending unit to die in its controller's own fight phase, assuming that you've successfully formed a tri-point after a charge. Obviously, the units inside the tri-point can escape using the Desperate Breakout stratagem, but especially with command points as tight as they are in the Warzone Nephilim format, that's often not a luxury that the defender can afford. Now, in order to accomplish this, it's important to remember that you oftentimes don't want to make too many attacks against the unit that you're looking to tri-point, since if you do too much damage, the defender could assign all of the damage to the model that you're trying to tri-point and prevent them from being there in order to be trapped. So oftentimes what you'll do is, in order to successfully complete your charge, only put a single member of your unit in melee, since if any of the other members were in melee, they would be forced to resolve their melee attacks targeting that unit. Instead, if we can put them outside engagement range and outside a half inch of another from their unit who's engaging this enemy unit, they won't be able to make any attacks, meaning that only the model that you have initially engaging them would be able to swing. You can use your pile-in moves to get them close as long as you don't bring them within that inch and force them to make your attacks. Then use those consolidate moves to move towards the closest model, in this case the Tactical Marine, and complete the tri-point, assuming that they didn't get killed by the single model swings that you engaged them with. There is one niggling rule that I mentioned at the start of the video when going through the rules recap, and that being that models that are in base contact with an enemy cannot use combat movement. They cannot be moved from heroic interventions, pile-ins, or consolidates. So this means that if an enemy is threatening to use combat movement to engage some of your units in melee or move models onto an objective, you can potentially, if you're able to fight before them in the fight phase, use your own combat movement to put them in base contact and prevent them from moving at all. This allows you to prevent exactly what we were discussing previously, including stopping models from getting to your objectives or to get within the melee range of the models that they want to attack. This can be accomplished on the receiving end of a charge as well, if you have command points available for an interrupt and your opponent had to fight first somewhere else, which will at least prevent any pile-in moves before the unit being based makes its own attacks against your defending units. Obviously, your units will be suffering damage from the swing back if they move up into base-to-base contact with enemy models, but oftentimes it can steal your opponent those precious inches that they could use to come take your objectives away. Oftentimes very tight games of 40k are decided by control of these combat phase movements. And as I demonstrated, preventing these tricks from being used against you is relatively simple. Oftentimes, competitive or particularly tight games of Warhammer 40k can be decided by control of these combat phase movements. And preventing your opponent from getting any benefit from them is a really big deal, which leaves me with one simple adage to take home with you as we move to wrap up this basic tactics video. And that is, when it comes specifically to consolidation moves, always remember, ABB, always be basing. Now, if you found any of these tips and tactics useful, I'm going to go into this topic in way greater detail in this week's episode of Advanced Tactics, the regular video series where I go super deep into particular tactical topics in Warhammer 40k and discuss how to use those rules to your advantage. So if you found the advice in this video useful, you can get access to that by joining on patreon.com/tacticaltortoise or in the link down below the video by purchasing a channel membership. Now, with that said, we did just talk about heroic interventions on the last episode of Advanced Tactics, and I do want to mention them here slightly because they are a form of combat maneuvering. As I said before, a heroic intervention is a type of combat movement that triggers and the heroic intervention step of a charge phase when an enemy character is within 3 inches of an enemy unit. The character has to belong to the inactive player of the turn, so the player whose turn it is does not get to perform heroic interventions during their own turn. It's something to stop your opponent from getting too feisty with their units during the charge phase and allows you to punish them with nearby characters. That said, there's a lot of weird idiosyncrasies about heroic interventions. They operate just like any other combat movement, and like all combat movements, can be used to bring characters into engagement range of enemy models. However, it doesn't count as a charge, which is something that a lot of players do get confused about, and doesn't automatically allow the character to fight the enemy. This means that in a situation where a character is particularly near another friendly unit, you could run into a situation where the unit being intervened into, if it is unbased at the time that it makes its pile-in and consolidate moves, can use the trick that we talked about earlier to move out of engagement range of some enemy models in order to leave your character unengaged. If your character is then left outside engagement range of any enemy models, they are unable to fight since they don't fulfill any of the criteria of being selected to fight in the fight phase. Those are having been charged or currently engaging an enemy unit. So similar to consolidate moves, heroic intervention moves should probably also use that ABB adage. If you base the target unit, while they do get to now attack you because you declared a heroic intervention move that turn, at least they'll be forced to divert attacks from your other models and won't be able to leave engagement range with you, meaning that assuming the character survives, they will be able to fight back when it comes to their turn to fight. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of the Basic Tactics series. If you want more episodes like this, check out the channel. We have a lot of videos covering all sorts of different tactical topics in Warhammer 40k, and I want to throw a big shout out to Purple War for sponsoring the video, as well as everyone who supports the channel over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. YouTube channel members you can join in the link down below the video, and Twitch subscribers, all of you are awesome, and I really appreciate your patronage. And with that, we'll wrap things up. Thanks so much for watching. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.